I'll tell you.
Well, I thought that was for my individual thing
Thank you,
when
Catherine.
I'm looking at it.
All right, this is why I have.
All
right.
I know we had an attorney here for some reason.
Nice job,
Excuse me, but it's muted.
Okay, are we good to proceed, Ruth?
You're ready to proceed.
Okay.
My apologies.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the public hearing. Regarding PC 22-077, amendments to chapter 18.55 flood hazard overlay. So the order of tonight's proceedings will be a staff report, followed by public testimony, commission questions of staff, commission deliberations, and then final recommendations. Is there anyone online that's come to testify? What am I missing?
Sorry, nothing.
Okay.
No one has signed up to testify.
Okay. Well, I guess I can,
You should still read it.
I should still read it. I just have such a hard time doing that. Persons testifying either orally or in writing may request a continuance or request the record be held open. These requests should be included in your testimony. The public hearing is now open. Do any commissioners wish to declare any potential or actual conflicts of interest? Are there any rebuttals? Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds, meaning the Planning Commission is not the appropriate body for this hearing? Okay. Land use decisions, such as the case under consideration this evening, are evaluated against applicable statewide planning goals and guidelines and criteria from the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan as presented in the staff report. We will now proceed to the staff report.
So I can summarize just a little bit of background. I know everybody, I believe, was here last week. That I think it was back in April, the city got visited by a FEMA representative for unrelated reasons to this, but it's at the same time, they looked through all of the documents relating to floodplain, flood hazard, overlay zones, and noticed that our development code hadn't been updated in a long time, not just this chapter, but all chapters, but he was focused directly on this, and decided to do a periodic review of it, came up with this, which I apologize for not getting to you sooner, but this is the document that really guided my attention to detail on every aspect of what he was suggesting we either required to do to meet current FEMA regulations that all affect the National Flood Insurance Program. So these were things that were outlined, color-coded to must change, recommended, possibly okay to leave as is. I looked at the must change. It was pretty simple, just went through it and modified everything that was called out. There's a model code that FEMA has that is designed to meet all the current FEMA regulations and is updated as things get updated at the agency. The other part of it being recommended changes was from going through this, I don't know if I mentioned this last meeting, but I'll mention it now. Wasn't significant changes, and that's why they weren't called out to be must changes. They were more just how they were worded, vocabulary that was updated from previous vocabulary used to more vocabulary that's used more commonly today. So that's where I think a lot of the recommended changes came from. They didn't significantly change any of the underlying code or desired outcome of the regulation. And so going through all of this, I just said, well, why don't we just update it to the current language you're using? It would be easier if we ever get, I don't know if audit is the right word, but another periodic review, that would be more in line or staying up to date with the current language in the model code. So doing the must change and the recommended changes, went through everything in here. It's 10 pages. You know, having done stuff like this that comes from either state level or federal level, these have all had their own public hearings. They've all been vetted through their own process and through their process of experts. And so I don't tend to go through it or scrutinize a lot of what was in here. I know the commission did, and I respect you guys going through and looking at these and trying to see how they would affect things. But I think the goal of this is to find a way to take stuff that for current construction definitely does less harm to, you know, to the surroundings. So when you're dealing with one thing in a floodplain and you go through and you adapt it to the current code, it's going to affect everything. So there's sometimes something that is under review or construction that when it's done, other things need to be looked at. And this kind of points out what those other steps are that we need to do. Or it's taking stuff that has been destroyed. I don't think there's anything in Philomath that's been destroyed, but when it's rebuilt to these codes so that these type of incidents won't happen again, or it will mitigate that problem, not only for the individual, but for the city and for the federal government. So that's kind of the underlying reason of updating this. Going through, you can see that we went through the process of reviewing it to the statewide planning goals and making findings on that, as well as the city's own comprehensive plan policies and goals, and found that it met everything to our standards. And yeah, so I'm recommending approval of all the changes. I can mention that I did ask for comments from everybody last meeting, and kind of reiterated it in this past week when you guys did get the updated version. All of the comments that we made at the last meeting, even though it was in a public hearing, we took notes. We kind of made a list through the recording of everything that was talked about. Those were in the initial version that everybody got in their packet. So all of those updates from last meeting were put into here, as well as getting three comments from 3 different commissioners, and everything was from Darlene and from Ruth and from outside through Joe, but through John McGee, made some comments. They were all great comments. I made the changes in all the cases, except for, I think there was one recommendation from Darlene, your comments on substantial improvement calculation. You had a question about it being understood by someone who's familiar with these documents, but if it could have some more explanation. And I did send these all to Mitch, by the way, who's the FEMA representative, and waited for his comments to come back before kind of looking them over and kind of bouncing back what he was saying and what some of the commissioners were saying. And in that case, Darlene, the substantial improvement is defined in the definitions. So they can go back. So it kind of talks about it, but a lot of these terms that aren't familiar with everyday kind of conversation, but in these particular incidents, they're usually, a lot of them you'll probably find in the definitions, and they understand some of that.
We didn't have that before.
Yeah. So,
That makes sense.
and a lot of them were typos, so like Ruth pointed out, a good 6 of them. You actually had some good comments about changing some lettering in the format of the paragraph, so I did all of those, double checked all of the typos and changed some of the formatting that you suggested, so we did it. The only one thing that hasn't been resolved, and that came from John McGee, was an instance with, FEMA uses the word mean sea level. Maybe this is something that you may be able to help us out with. I couldn't get an answer on this before the meeting, but John called it bogus about 4 times here to use mean sea level, because he says it's not definable, and everybody now uses North American vertical datum. So that was something I did shoot. I did get this morning. I shot out to Mitch. He didn't get back to me. But that's something that we can certainly tackle between now, this meeting, and council, and try to get an answer on that. And it looks to be all in kind of one section that it's addressing that. So, but yeah, so updated from the last meeting, updated from the comments that I received now.
Just to clarify, the update from these last few comments is something that you have that we have not yet seen. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were,
Not this.
it's,
That in our packet is not the corrected one.
no, because I just got these in the last week when I asked for.
So
But
the
yeah,
packet,
they're all typos. They're all,
the packet has our input from the last meeting.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have the input that came from Darlene whenever it was you sent that email.
Right. I seem to have found some ones as we go through it, which I'm hoping that we will,
and
that
that's fine, that's fine.
did
Yeah.
not reflect the changes that were asked a month ago.
Page 18-11, line 38, insert the space between the
Yeah,
and
we're-
physical.
We're
Yeah.
kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We'll get
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah, so I'm just telling you what I received from Darlene and from Ms. Causey and from John were mostly typos, some formatting, but nothing that's gonna throw anything off. Yeah, certainly open to more questions, any issues that you have. I'm just saying that what we got, updating it as we go along. Anything that is said here before, if you do make your recommendation tonight for city council, those will be included as they go forward. So, so yeah, the city's recommending approval on this, meets all the statewide planning goals and the city's goals and policies, so.
Are there any brief questions of staff, of the overview level of the staff report? Yeah. Okay. Our next step is public testimony, and there is no one to publicly testify, but I'm wondering what happens with some of the comments that were made, like comments from McGee. Is that something that gets entered into the record?
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of classifies.
So Gary, clarification, are you saying questions or discussion has not ended, however, right?
Hasn't even started.
Okay.
Hasn't even started. Yeah, right now is when we'd have public testimony. But since there's nobody here, the only real public testimony we have is what came from our local engineer, John
Okay.
McGee. Yeah. So, okay, having no public testimony and no requests for holding the record open or continuance, we can entertain a motion to accept this.
You just closed the public hearing.
Oh, where's that?
The last one on 19.
On 19.
Use the gavel.
Yes. See, there's motion language there if there's a continuance or a request. There we go. Okay. Public hearing is now closed. And now we can ask additional questions of staff if we would like, or we can move on into deliberations. Because you seem to be pretty tolerant of us asking questions of staff in the middle of deliberations. Am I wrong about that?
That is, it is allowed, and there are reasons to be careful with that, but we can go over those later.
Okay.
That's no problem.
Well,
Any,
okay. I
any
have-
questions of staff?
Just to help out, and maybe this isn't the place to do it, but on this thing that you handed out on the bottom of the second page, there is a definition for mean sea level. And so when we get to that part, I'll recommend that we put that in there, in our definitions.
So I was going to respond to that a little bit. I think the reason it says mean sea level is because that's kind of a generic term. All datum reference some form of sea level, and they're always changing. So if you look at historical documents, there'll be different datum. So the NAVD that's commonly used is 1988 now, but it used to be, before 1988, it was something else. And there was National Geodetic vertical datum, and then there was big cities have their own datum. So I think the mean sea level reference means something.
Very general.
It's generic so that in 40 years when we have a new datum, it'll still be applicable, is my suspicion.
That seems unlikely.
Oh, no, it's changed every 20 to 40
Sea level
years.
is gonna be the same. in
No,
20 years.
it's not the sea level, it's the technology of surveying that decides that things aren't quite accurate, so they make adjustments. So, when you're trying to calculate an elevation, the earth is round and everything goes up and down, and there's all kinds of different sea levels. There's mean lower low water and mean lower high water, and it's a very complicated science, and it does change with time with technology. And so something that is 322 feet, 322.33 feet now might be 322.42 feet in 20 years, just because.
Technology. Interesting.
Is that something that you could take a little closer look at it now that you know and just see and kind of see if that fits with what John is talking about, or is it?
I think he's just suggesting we, as a city, talk about a specific datum, but whereas FEMA would like to see a generic term. And I think it's safer to stick with a generic term because over time it changes. And so you're always going to have historical documents that this is going to require us to maintain. And it doesn't matter which datum it is as long as it's recorded, which any engineering report would never give you an elevation without stating which datum it's on.
So someone sees, so like a surveyor like John sees, he's reading this and he's trying to follow the requirements of what he's doing, and he sees mean sea level. He's basically going to go and use whatever system he's using to calculate that. He's not, and the city's not going to come and go, well, that is not a recognized surveying tool that we use. We understand the same thing, that it is a generic term to whatever is being used at that.
Right, and today he's going to use NAVD 88. So
keeping it that way makes sense. Yeah.
his grandchild may not.
And this is a question, but I was going to have it just be part of the deliberations, but now I'm not quite so sure because it is a question. So here I go. This is 18.4. And you were asked last month to check on 10 through 14. And you were going to check on it just because it doesn't seem to fit full on with. It looks, I was wondering if you were able to check on that if this is, since we just got this 4 hours ago, I wasn't able to look up on the sheet that you gave us. from FEMA, so I don't, forgive me if it's listed, but it talks about functionally dependent use. You know, docking and unloading and loading cargo and passengers and such. It doesn't really fit Philomath. You were gonna check and see if it's something that we just had to keep in there.
I don't think any of the definitions are must keeps, but I think
Okay,
when my recollection of that was that there was no harm in keeping it in there. The loading and unloading of cargo and passengers may or may not, or may change. If we want to take it out now, we could eliminate it because we deem it as a group to say that doesn't really apply to today. Or we leave it in there because things might change and we don't realize it. Or it may have something to do with any type of equipment that is being used in any type of construction along the banks. And
Well,
So Peggy,
and that would be, if I may finish, it seemed like a good fit for Philomath under 18.5, line 41, water dependent. It's actually talking about, well, water dependent means structures for commerce or industry. You know, it's not talking about unloading, loading cargo. It seems like that would be a good fit for Philomath, whereas I understand what you're saying, that we could put in, because you never know if we're going to start getting passenger. Doesn't seem likely, but
or that it's a definition, it really is
can
irrelevant.
I
to
just
any type
pause it
of
right there?
procedure.
This is something I'd like to discuss more when we get to deliberations, because I have an
okay,
opinion about
but
it.
it was a question, so I
Yes,
felt
but
I had to
I think
ask
the
it.
question's over and now we're deliberating.
Okay. Then I'm just going to take a stab, and any other questions I might have, I'll just keep them in the deliberations and deal with it at the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? All right, deliberations. Do we want to start at the front and just kind of go through and talk about anything specific?
That's always my preference.
Press start by getting a motion on the table.
Yeah. I was there a while ago, I forgot. Does anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move that the planning commission adopt the findings presented in the staff report dated 8/8/2022 on PC 22-05 to amend the development code and recommend an amending ordinance be approved by the city council.
We have a second. I think
Take your
Gianni,
choice. I hear.
Councilor Bernardini seconded the motion.
Yes, that's fine.
No, Commissioner, I'm not on my A game tonight. Okay, there's a motion on the floor to accept the findings as presented. Now, are there any comments, deliberations? I know I have some, but they're kind of towards the back.
Well,
I
I guess I have a question. Well, I get a question, I don't know. On the first page,
Yes,
the item C9 that Darlene had mentioned about adding the 2 there. If I took it right, Patrick, like that, you added it in.
Yes.
So it's part of the motion that we approve it, so we don't have to talk about that. So,
well,
or
I'm a little confused on that point because what we have
That's
in the
fine.
record is this document. And now Patrick has made a few modifications, but none of us have seen that. So I think we need to hear from him where those.
Yeah, if it's more than just a scrivener's error, scrivener's correction, if there's a misspelling, those don't need approval, but if there's anything more than that or a small reformat, then it should be brought up during this meeting and it should be recorded.
well, like in that instance, the only thing that would be there would be adding the word 2 in front of number 9.
Yeah, and I'd consider
And I
that
did that.
scrivener's
Yeah.
error. So,
Okay.
yeah, that doesn't need a motion by the.
That was
Okay.
actually brought up at last month's meeting.
Okay.
So Pat, is there anything that you have now done that is more than that we do need to discuss?
I would say the only thing was from Darlene,
She had another one. Or no. that
The
was-
first one, my first question on page.
Yeah,
let's
that's
see,
two.
where is it?
Two on 18-7.
I'm looking at the wrong one here. 18-17, lines 11 and 12. The question was, it seems these two lines should be retained.
Oh, that was my correction.
Oh, that's Ruth. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking. So, all right, so let's go to that one since I just mentioned it. You guys are probably all on page 17.
Yes.
It seems these two lines should be retained. Looking at it, I agree, and remove the strike through on that. So,
So do we need to make a motion then? Okay, I'll move that we, on page 18-17, on lines 11 and 12, remove the strike throughs.
Second?
Tony? Second.
All in favor? Aye, none opposed.
It's a very cordial group.
and so you want me to just go through what I think you might, this is the formatting.
Please do.
Page 18-7, under A3,
18-7, is that what you said?
18-7, under A3, which begins with in riverine flood zones. Darlene made a good point of, as just regular formatting rules, changing the 1 through 6 to A through F. So,
But then also, she also said, and I noted too, that it needs a few more words here, because it says in riverine flood zones, the proposed elevation and all utilities of all new and substantially improved structures. It needs some words that say, shall be provided, or I'm not clear what.
Specifically, the following information is required.
Yeah, specifically the following
and
information.
prior to
is
that,
required.
maybe you should say specifically the following information is.
Like up in number 2, the last sentence before the ABC. Darlene had some.
Oh,
things.
good point. Yes, I did add that. That was a good,
Okay.
that was a good suggestion.
So,
Did add specifically, it's basically taking it up, staying in, in line with kind of how 2 and 3 work.
can you read the words that you added?
So we added specifically, comma, the following information is required to,
It would be line
3.
25 at the end.
yeah.
Okay.
Actually, it's an additional sentence.
So maybe a motion to add that language and redesignate the bullets from numbers to letters?
And also probably remove the bolding. Because that
At
was,
the end of the day,
that was talked about. too.
yeah, when this goes on to be codified, it will be. These are just more references in case people want to cross-reference right now as you're reading it, especially since it's new language. But yeah, the bolding will not transfer
Okay.
to the codification. But yeah, those are good points, Charlie. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion to add the phrase specifically, the following information is required at the end of the sentence that starts on line 23.
And change.
Oh,
And change numbers to letters?
and change the numbers to the letters in that
Second.
listing.
All in favor?
That doesn't make sense. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
No, okay, deliberations.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If you start that sentence, in riverine flood zones, the proposed elevation of the lowest floor and all attendant utilities of all new and substantially improved structures, then there's a semicolon. What? There's no, there's no verb.
Yeah,
Like,
you're
what's
right.
happening here?
You're right.
And then we
You're
have,
right.
in accordance with the requirements, particularly, this doesn't quite work here yet.
Okay.
Thanks for saving the team on this one.
What's a grammar
Well,
Nazi?
if you change the period at the end of that to a comma and don't create a new sentence, and you follow with specifically, I actually don't need the word specifically, the following information is required.
But I'm saying that we have a problem before we hit that semicolon.
Yeah, because right now it says in riverine flood zones, the proposed elevation and all attendant utilities,
What?
and that's all it says.
So just needs.
Must be provided or must be high or low or,
So if we want to vote on Commissioner Hunsaker's motion, if he wants to withdraw it, while we work on that.
yeah, would you withdraw the motion? Oh, yeah, it was Darlene's motion.
I'll withdraw, I move to withdraw. Motion.
And I'm okay with that.
Okay, now please Dr. Duck again.
We just need to add the verb before the semicolon. So after structures.
What,
Something. needs
But what
to
is the
happen.
verb? What are we supposed to do regarding the elevation of the floor and the utilities?
well, the verb is that they have to do these things. So maybe you say this specifically, the following information is required before that semicolon. Or not having a semicolon, but have it in front of the in accordance.
Oh, what about starting? The following information is required in riverine flood zones. No.
Well, yeah, I think that would work too. Because it's just talking about the proposed elevation and the utilities have to be recorded, basically, in accordance to this section. And in how they do that, it's, the ABC. Isn't that how it reads?
I could say, because if you go to what section 1855, 140C3, of all new and substantially improved structures shall be maintained in accordance with the requirements. That's, you could eliminate the
Yeah,
section
that works.
14140C3 because being retained is what 1855 140C3 says.
There we go. That's a verb. Now something is happening.
Can be maintained. So you could put that, or you double it up, but I think in accordance with requirements, we can keep that because it gives specific requirements, but you could say shall be maintained.
So you insert shall be maintained prior to in accordance with the specific requirement.
Yeah, you don't need a
requirements
semicolon.
of section
I don't
18.55.
need a semicolon.
I do think you still need specifically the following information is required.
Mhm. You're right. To make, because that's why there's a list.
Because that's why there's a list.
So we need both.
So
Take out the semicolon, add, what did you just say, Pat?
Shall be maintained.
Shall be maintained in accordance with the requirements, and then what did you just say?
Period. And then you go back to specifically. the
Exactly,
following
specifically the
information.
following. and
Yeah,
then
you
we're
still
good.
need that, right?
Yeah.
How is that information of the proposed elevation of the lowest floor and all utilities any different than 1 through 6? The A through whatever. I mean, shouldn't it say in riverine flood zones, the following information shall be maintained, provided and maintained? And then you just list elevation of the lowest floor, elevation of attendant utilities. And you just go through it, because I'm struggling how that discussion about elevation and utilities is the main paragraph to which the bullets below align. Because it isn't that just another bullet in that list rather than something that is kind of
And
above.
it's another bullet, like it would be,
Like it would be number one. or-
Yeah.
Yeah.
it would be E in number 2? Is that what you're saying?
No, I would make it A and B, and then 1 would become C.
don't get that. What?
In riverine flood zones, the following information shall be provided and maintained. And A is the proposed elevation in relation to mean sea level of the lowest floor, including basement. B is elevation of all attendant utilities of new and substantially improved structures. And then C is proposed elevation of any non-residential, to which any non-residential structure will be flood-proof. And then on down the list. Because it's, those two things are just part of the list of what has to be provided, right?
That's a lot clearer.
Am I wrong about that?
Say the following things are
Not sure.
required, and then A through what it
Right.
would be, A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
I read it differently. I think if you're
Oh.
in the riverine flood zone.
Yeah.
Then we're looking for lowest floor. We're looking for utilities, and we're looking for substantially improved structures. And for each of those three things in the riverine flood zone, we need 1 through 6, or A through F.
And just to chime in, since this is under the Section A, establishment of development permit, and it goes 1, development permit required, 2, application for development permit, it might make sense to try to mirror that language where you have short summary and then say
Mhm.
shall be made or shall be,
Required information or something.
yes, shall be delivered as part of the application of Irving's flood zone. Just thinking about where it's at in this particular section, how the two above it are.
Yeah.
Laid out.
But see, yeah, it's got to be something different because A above says elevation of the lowest floor. That's required. Elevation in relation to mean sea level of flood proofing of any structure. So 2B is identical to number 1 of 3, 3A. 2B equals 3A. It's the exact same thing. And so C is identical to 2. And D is identical to 3. So two and 3 are redundant on the first 4 items of 2.
Well, on the, back in last month, 2A through D were strike throughs, like they weren't there. They were being struck through.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can see why it would come off now as being duplicative because it's not strike through anymore.
Good point, yeah. When you guys, you removed something, was that the one I did? I don't have the working document with me. But there was something where I had struck through and then removed because.
Yeah, it was struck through on the original document that we were given back last month. 2A through D were, and then we talked about it. And you were going to, actually specifically Gary asked that all of A be reviewed, and you were going to review it. That's what my notes say. So now it's not struck through anymore. So it's kind of, it's reading the way it's reading.
No, well, I'll tell you what, so I went through this and I changed stuff, and then I wasn't, to be honest with you, I was not going to fight with you about what you wanted removed when it seemed like that, so I did it. To come up with an explanation, I don't know what to tell you at this point, except for you asked to put it back in. It was a direct relationship. Put this new wording in red in, take out this, because it was duplicate. That's what this said,
Yeah.
is what I was going by. And then when it was like, oh, no, we want to do it this way, I was like, all right, I'm just going to do it. I'm not gonna, you asked me to do it, I'm staff, I'll do it.
Can I?
And now we're at this point, so. Yeah. It was struck through for a reason, but, if you know, to duplicate something I didn't see as like, duplicating is not as bad as contradicting or something like that, so duplicating, I'll say, all right, I'll take it off. But anything was struck through, it was probably done because, especially when it comes in right before or after some new language, there's probably some reason to it, so.
Does anyone have the old one, or from the last month? Oh, so what was line 20 through 27? I'm reading the minutes.
It was our line 15 through 22.
In there, it says repetition
wanted
to
that
section
in.
3. And then at lines 20 through 42, it says strike specifically the following information is required.
Yes. So it's all coming back to me.
Okay.
So I don't know if anybody can see this, but this is all strike through. The only thing that we requested is that this sentence here has strike through because it says specifically the following information is required. So line 13 and a half through 22 should be strike through.
Okay.
And the comment in the meeting, thank you, Peggy, is that 13 and a half that starts with specifically should be strike through.
All A through D,
Through D.
and plus that last sentence.
Is in when we're in riverine flood zones where that starts, is that still a number 3?
That's still number 3, but I think what we're missing is in riverine flood zones, the specific information, following information is required. I think that's what we're missing. If you strike out specifically in 13 and a half through 22, and then say number 3 in riverine flood zones, the following information is required, and then say proposed elevation of the lowest floor, just like
Yeah,
struck out A.
paragraph 2 doesn't need specifically the following information because it's all struck through.
Right.
So that's struck through.
And I think what FEMA was saying that had to be provided that wasn't being asked for in 2 are the elevation of utilities. And then the additional information down in 4, 5, and 6.
So we're adding specifically the following information is required, line 25, right? We're adding that.
In line 23.
in
After
line.
the word zones.
After the word zones.
So that's a
After
complete
the word
sentence, correct?
In riverine flood zones, the following information is required.
And then, what is it like?
So shall be maintained as no longer.
Well, later on, the duties and responsibilities of the local administrator, that's where it goes on and on about what has to be maintained. Or wait a minute, maybe it's,
So shall be maintained. That, I still agree that sentence doesn't make sense. It does need some type of connection, right? Or are you saying it does now make sense?
well, no, in A is the development, establishment of the development permit. And the establishment is, that information has to be provided. The maintained is down below in C3.
Okay.
So in
Are you
A3,
able to read through like how it should read top to bottom, 2 and 3? Like one time through, so it is all coherent.
And then one of us will say, so moved.
okay.
Like we keep doing this phrase by
Yeah,
phrase and we're
yeah.
getting lost like where we are.
So-
Make it one coherent piece, 2
So
through 3.
A2 starts at line 9. I say that stays in place through lines 10, 11, 12, and then on line 13, it says facilities and the location of the foregoing. And then just period, that's the end of 2. And then,
A through D is struck through.
and then
Specifically.
specifically, and then A through D is struck through. And then line 23, in riverine flood zones, the following is specifically required. A, the proposed elevation in relation to mean sea level of the lowest floor, including basement, and all attendant utilities of new and substantially improved structures. And it can say in accordance with the requirements of section 1855-140C3. And then B is proposed elevation in relation to mean sea level to which any non-residential structure will be flood proofed. And then 2 through 6 becomes C through C, D,
So
E,
3 is
F, and
A
G.
now? 3 is A?
Because the numbers are changing to letters.
No,
That's all.
3 is still 3 in riverine.
3 is
flood
3, but the
zones.
numbers following have
The
changed.
following information is specifically required. A, the proposed elevation in relation to mean sea level.
And we can, and make all that A, and then number 1 becomes B.
That's where we're getting lost.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
You- it-
Are you getting lost?
We're just trying to make.
'Cause you're-
6 match
you-
up with A,
what-
C,
you're-
D.
what's- what's A?
So that's
A
why he's-
is the proposed elevation in relation
He's
to
not
the
saying
sea
that.
level
No, he is.
of the lowest
He's
floor.
saying, and
No,
And the rest
we
of
already
it-
asked A, B, C,
A,
D.
exactly, but A is now
Oh.
gonna be here before in riverine flood zones. So this is now B, this
We'll
is C,
revisit
this
it
is
once
D.
people.
That's what I asked him, he said no. I said, does 3 become A? And he says, no.
3 is still
exists.
3, but then there's a new A.
So 3.1
Midpoint
is going to
through.
become 3.B.
But 3.A is, 3 is,
Oh, so
You're
there is
saying-
no 3, now it's just,
well, no,
No,
The
no.
3 is still there.
I know, but
Which is A?
what is 3?
okay, 3 is in every.
Well, hold
Riverine.
on.
Okay.
We have a suggestion from council that I think is a good one. That we get a motion to strike specifically and then A, B, C, and D under 2, just so we can get that out of the way.
That's
Can we
good.
go back and withdraw the motion that is previously on the table?
I thought
I thought we did do that.
I don't think it ever was so moved.
Let's do it again.
It was seconded.
Which, what do you have, Ruth? Is
That was
the motion on the
it was a
table?
motion by Darlene, seconded by
Van.
Van, and that was to change 1 through 6 to A through F, and to add specifically the following information is required. That was the very beginning of this discussion.
It was withdrawn.
Really?
It was.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought I had it.
Okay, to take the suggestion, I'll make a motion that on page 18.7, starting at line 9,
Start at line 13.
I'll start at line 13, that the following information be removed, starting with specifically the following information is required, and that A, B, C, and D also be removed.
Yeah, second.
Second.
All in favor?
I,
It's unanimous. Now,
one more time.
one more time. I'm thinking that what everybody's potentially agreeing to here is that 3 begins with a statement, in riverine flood zones, the following is required.
Wait. I'm sorry. The following information is required, or
Yeah.
you didn't say information, or the following specifically, the following.
I didn't say specifically because I don't understand why that needs to be there.
Okay.
The following information is required.
The following information is required, and that is the full content of 3.
That's 3, okay, so
Okay.
3 that's
And
right
then-
there.
And then
Sorry, I
A,
was wrong.
and then A begins, the proposed elevation in relation to mean sea level of the lowest floor, including basement, and all attendant utilities of all new and substantially improved structures in accordance with the requirements of section 18.55-140C3. And then B is number 1, C, D, E, F, and G.
Okay, now I get it.
And that needs to be a comma, not a semicolon after the word structures.
Where?
After the word structures in what is now A.
Line 25.
Sorry, yes, line 25, correct.
Yes,
That needs to be a comma.
comma.
So moved.
Second? Was that a second?
That counts as a second. When you say yes, I think that
Yeah,
counts as a second.
Yeah, I think so. Do you second the motion, Jim?
Yes, sir.
Is there any questions about what was just said? Or do we all feel like we understand it? and ready
Yeah,
to
Ruth,
vote?
would you repeat it, please?
That's,
No, we got it. We
this
got
has
it.
been a great 45 minutes. Let's
Yes.
go.
All right.
We got
We're doing the hard work. It's good. Okay, all in favor of the motion to restructure A3 on page 18-7? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. Thank you.
It's fun.
That's not gonna say anything right now.
Anybody got an easy one?
I got an easy one. On page 18-12. On lines 32 and 34. There's well, and actually starting on 31. At the very end of line 31, there's a colon. And the shall colon, and then there's D and E. So I believe D and E should be indented and should be 1 and 2 underneath C, rather than D and E under 3. Follow that?
Mhm.
I would agree.
Can you just down in D?
Yeah, I think because the equipment and service facilities shall, and then if replaced as part meets requirements of the section and not be mounted on or penetrate through breakaway walls.
Would it be I and,
Yes, formatting wise, I think we lose
Oh.
lowercase I and then
Okay,
lowercase double
yeah,
I.
all right.
I'm looking at the next page, 1813, and that's that next.
Yes, yes.
Here.
So D becomes lowercase I and indented, and E becomes II. Okay,
oh, it's so moved.
can we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
It's unanimous.
Aye.
All right.
Yeah.
That was as easy as it's gonna get tonight, I think.
Ruth, please stop us if that ever becomes hard to follow with what the actual motion
Can
is.
I do that?
Stop us if the motion becomes hard to follow when someone says I so move
Oh, I'm supposed to say I so moved.
or so move.
Question on 18.4.
Yes.
I remember we talked about this last time, page 23.
1823?
Yeah, 18.4, 18-4, line 23. New construction means for floodplain management purposes, new construction means structures. 4, doesn't make sense to me.
So that second new construction means should be deleted.
So
Yeah,
moved.
It makes, to me, it makes sense. I
It
mean, so
does?
what- Yeah. so
Okay,
what if it says
read
like,
it so it makes
New
sense.
construction means for floodplain management purposes. New construction means structures for which the start of construction. These are all like in quotes, remember? So commenced on or after the effective date of a floodplain management regulation. Yeah, I mean, it just reiterates what it is. I mean, it could probably be said better, but I don't think it's a definition, so.
You could restructure the sentence more sensibly, but the intent is for the line to begin with the words being defined.
Right.
So that's why it's kind of redundant. It is redundant.
So since it's red, if we were to look it up here on the either required or recommended, it would read like that from the FEMA wording?
Yes.
It would read like
Yeah,
that?
it's a model code.
Yeah, it does. It's on the third page at the very top.
I agree, this doesn't make any sense to me. This, For floodplain management purposes, new construction means structures for blah, blah, blah. Right?
Each of these sections.
That would be a better way of saying it, but you always want the sentence to start
Start
with the
with
words
new
being
construction.
defined.
Okay, so why do we have new construction means again after the comma?
So if you look up at line 15, it says manufactured dwelling means a structure transportable in one or more sections.
Got it.
So
New
I
construction means,
don't know why new construction means for floodplain management purposes, structures for which the start of construction commenced on or after.
I guess, why the new construction the second time?
Right,
I was
it's the
gonna say-
second time that is confusing.
Well,
And
this one-
means,
there is a duplication there. One of those needs to go.
yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think
And the second one, since the first one needs to stay.
Right.
Right.
It's part of the definition.
Just take out the new construction means the second time and then it's fine.
Right before the word structures.
Exactly. Take out those 3 words and then.
New
we're good.
construction means for floodplain management purposes, structures for which the start of construction commenced on the day after.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Can we get it so moved?
So moved.
So are we leaving the first new construction definition in there, lines 21 and 22?
Yes.
Yeah, wait, that doesn't make sense.
Oh,
Under duplication.
Oh.
Well, there is 2 different new constructions. And so I don't like saying new construction twice. This is what the guy told us, or at least on the second one.
The
one-
difference is, the difference is in the second, in the red version, it includes the phrase, and any subsequent improvements to such structures, and then it needs a period.
You can take out 21 and 22.
No, I would leave them in and just start 23 at the end of 22, because it is distinguished by applying to floodplain management purposes. So you could say at the end of 22, for floodplain management purposes, new construction means.
Oh, yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
we have a winner.
So we're gonna strike the first new construction means.
No,
Yeah,
The first on 23.
Oh,
23.
yeah.
23.
So we'll just continue the sentence after line 22.
Mhm.
For floodplain management purposes, new construction means, so we'll leave that one in.
I like that because new construction should
Have one definition.
have one definition.
So there was no second on the motion, so we're
Did
okay.
somebody motion it? Move
You
it?
did.
Oh,
So
so
nobody
moved.
seconded it. So
Nobody
that-
seconded.
I second.
Don't second it. New motion.
New motion.
I'm sorry, I missed it. I'm sorry.
Okay, I mean,
Van's motion died because there was no second.
Okay.
So we're looking for a new motion for this proposed language from Councilor Cosmo.
So I'll move that we combine lines, new construction from lines 21 through 25 into one paragraph, and taking out the first new construction means on line 23.
Perfect.
Yes. So,
But it's gonna die for lack of a second if somebody don't hurry and say something.
I second.
all in favor? Say aye.
I,
Peggy's wasn't
That's
sure
because it still, it doesn't read right, but it's okay. It's gonna be looked at again.
by the council.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
but generally speaking, you're okay.
So was that enough? Did you abstain from voting, Peggy?
I'm not gonna abstain because I'm here in the conversations and that's not how we do abstains, right? And so it would be a no because it's not clear enough for me, but I'm not, it's not worth
Okay,
going over it again.
the motion passes 4-1.
If we're on that same page, at the very top, John asked on line 3, about a designated height. John asked the question, well, who designates it? I mean, it starts out as more than 1 foot, but we take out the 1 foot and it's saying then a designated height. I didn't see anywhere where who gets to pick what that designated height is.
No, that was something, again, that came from John.
Yeah.
I shot it to Mitch, the FEMA guy, he didn't get back to me, so that's something that I can figure out before.
My suspicion is that there's different heights for different types of activities and different locations. Sometimes it's a 1 foot and sometimes it's a 0. There's lots of bridges that are built that the requirement is 0 rise upstream.
But, you know, if
So
a developer and engineers looking at that, how are they going to figure out that answer?
that's a good question, but I think it has to do with the FEMA regulations as opposed to what would be in the city code. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. And this is defining the floodway. It's not looking to define what the height above the floodway needs to be. That can vary. This is just saying that's the definition of the floodway. So
Okay.
I'll get some clarification
Okay,
for the council as it goes forward.
okay. I mean,
Comments, Peggy?
Looking, we've flitted around, so some of it we've covered. My next one is page 1811. Line 13. Seems like the conditions of variances should probably be at the beginning of the of line 12 instead of at the end of 13. Does that make sense?
What if conditions for variances just had a colon instead of a period?
Or
And then
it seems like it
conditions
should
are
be at the
ABs.
beginning of 2 instead of the end of 2.
because then it identifies the
that
issue
works-
of
that
variance.
works also.
Yeah.
What was that? I didn't catch it.
Yeah.
On 1811, line 12,
Okay.
it should say conditions for variances, period. The city manager shall maintain the records of all appeal actions, and the rest stays the same. We're just moving conditions for variances at the beginning of the sentence on line 12 instead of the end of the sentence on line 13.
Is that a scrivener or is that we need a motion for that?
take a motion.
Okay, I move to, on page 18-11, to move conditions for variances on line 13 to the beginning on line 12 after 2 dot.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Peggy, I don't think you voted.
Pardon me?
All in favor?
Oh.
Okay. Unanimous. Thank you.
Is that 5-0?
Yes.
Thank you.
We did that, we did that. We might be done.
I would like to make a comment for future is, I believe, this could just be me, that if we would have had this at the beginning when this whole thing started and just been able to go through this compared to what we originally had in the code, it might have gone a lot quicker.
Yeah, for sure.
Instead of you doing all the staff time and then we dissect it.
I
That's
still
just,
had to do,
that's just how
I
I
still
do
had
it.
to do the work, so it just, I think even Chris or Ruth they saw the working document, it was chaos. It was just so much stuff. And yeah, the double columns really screwed me up, made it even more, so.
Right.
I had to work through all that, and even, I know Ruth spent a lot of time and
Leilani spent a lot of
Leilana's like, getting it to kind of fall into place, so that work had to be done, but yes, this is the first time we had something like this, but yeah, going forward, if this happens again, yeah.
Yeah.
Would help.
Well, I don't have anything else.
So any more motions or deliberations? All in favor of the motion currently on the floor to adopt the findings and send this document on to the city council? All in favor, as amended?
As amended.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Good job.
Because the planning commission's recommendation is not a decision, it cannot be appealed. The planning commission's recommendation will be considered by the city council in a subsequently noticed public hearing. Okay, 5-minute break.
Yes. Before that, can I say one little thing? It's just kind of in reference to all this, is as the, what's our other title? Where the
Citizen involvement.
CCI.
citizen involvement thing. It's very seldom do we get input like on this. I mean, we did get from one person, and Joseph went out asking for it specifically. I guess in my mind, we need to think about how, and I don't, when I was on the council and when I was mayor, this isn't what happens here now, it isn't any different. But if there is a way to get people involved in, decisions like this, I don't know what it is, but I guess sometime maybe in the future we should, I don't know, think about it or talk about it or something like that. But that's all.
Okay. I would like a 5-minute break.
Oh. Yes, I consent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Be back at 7:31.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly what it was.
Just delete
Yeah, that's what I was like.
the way they
like,
emailed
find
the
this
city.
stuff.
Yeah, here we go. Well, good.
We will be in touch then. Most of these
Yeah.
things are discussing them before they make things. My sister.
If you're not, I use that as an example.
Oh, very nice, yeah.
I'll give this.
You ready?
This is your-
No, it's Pat's illustrator. Okay, the next item of business for this planning commission meeting is amendment to PMC 18.45.080 material standards.
So this is not a public hearing, this is just a discussion to see if we can take this to a public hearing, and move forward with it. We have an individual that has an existing operation in the heavy industrial district. I don't, what was the property, is it? It's
Thompson.
Thompson Mill. And he's leasing space. I think they're working together, getting materials for this one individual. He manufactures the transformation of like wood sawdust with resin into brick. And I guess it's pretty, pretty solid. I'm not sure what industry it's used in after that, to be honest with you. I never really asked him that next question. But he does manufacture, he's been here for a while, he wants to expand. He's doing fairly well, but needs some storage area. And because permanent construction would be highly expensive, especially with our new material standards, well, prior to him knowing that, he just looked at doing some large steel structure with a heavy fabric outside, like shell. Right away, we're like, well, we just came up with these new material standards for industrial property. Doesn't fall into any particular area that we could approve, not even the section that gives this commission some discretion on certain materials. So we talked about, instead of turning them away, we just started thinking like, is there a scenario, would this scenario fit maybe a special circumstance to where we could allow this with certain criteria, certain things that if it met, we could allow this. So we still wanted to handle it through a variance, which would come before the commission for review and consideration. But we start with making a caveat in the material standards section to take it to that level of a Class B variance review. So so the language is on the next page. Chris put this together. Appreciate it. I did get your Councilwoman Causey put in there a T at the end of 8C where it says buildings and industrial zone are met in conformance with PC 1845. I think for myself, I'm open to this. Can't find the word. Making it only in the heavy industrial districts where we have two. They're large districts, but they're kind of single. They're not multiple owners. They're just large kind of operations. that something that goes on in the interior of these lots is hardly visible from a public right of way. So kind of the material standards that we want to see, like across the street, on main streets, are visible from a public right of way, or even from someone's backyard. I think this is kind of a different scenario to look for. So my biggest thing was, as long as it's not, visible, heavy industrial only, not light industrial, and not visible from a public right of way, I think it carries some merit, especially in this situation. So.
It is, oh, go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
have to get called on.
Go ahead. Oh.
Oh, thank you. You had said, just so I make sure I heard you right, you had said that the variance would come before the commission,
Does it? No.
but that's not what
Class B.
this says.
Oh, class
It's a
B.
class B.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. I remember when we had a variance it was somebody's fence, and that it did come before the commission. I agree with everything that you've said, but I think that it should come, these kind of variances should come before the planning commission and have more than just a one-person review of it, just like the fence that we reviewed a few years ago. I don't know if that would put it in a class C, correct? That would put it in a class C variance instead of a class B variance if it comes before the planning commission with, let's see, I wrote, with the appeals coming to the city council instead of an appeal coming to us. The planning commission would make the decision with the appeal going to the city council. Makes more sense to me other than just going to one person.
Yeah, sorry, I confused that at the beginning.
Pat, I can respond to that real quick
Okay, yeah.
on the staff side. So the issue with it being a class C is one of the provisions in a class C is that it can be self-imposed. So all of those lists of the variances and stuff in step C, if it's in any way self-imposed, it disqualifies itself. And so, typically a class C is going to be influenced by some outside force, like a slope or a repairing corridor or something there that was there already, and you're looking to infringe, or you're looking to, go higher, or something that wasn't there that you started. Material standards, well, we want to build a building, we want different standards. It really doesn't fit under the class C because it's going to be self-imposed all the way across the board. So it really is more an administrative class B level, because the class B doesn't have that requirement that it can't be self-imposed. So it does allow for a variance procedure. And if there's still a notification that goes out to surrounding area, and there's still a decision times made, and there's still an appeal process, it can still be appealed. But it gets away from this area where it can't be self-imposed. So there.
Well, is there any wording that would fit? I mean, it seems like there's gotta be some wording. Can I shut that?
You can shut it for now.
Okay. Can there be any wording that would fit, that would make this kind of variance come before the commission?
Appeal, yeah.
Not on an appeal? That the decision would actually come before the commission?
I guess,
It would be a class C to come before the commission. It'd have to be class C. And then we're in the same issue I just discussed.
So, Chair, too, I always thought, Chris can count for this. I was kind of surprised when you're dealing with variances where I come from. I know you guys don't like hearing that. All variances went to either a board of appeal or a planning commission. And I was always kind of like, this is very uncomfortable. But then through multiple variance requests that we've got, and the way Chris explained it, I mean, this does take out a level of very simple kind of, here's some straightforward criteria to follow. And it doesn't impede construction, doesn't impede projects from going forward, especially sometimes when variances that I've experienced being here come last minute, like, oh, we didn't know we weren't allowed to do that. It was after all the planning has been done, they've put out, and it comes to us or comes in front of me or Chris or Ruth in the form of a building permit. We're like, oh, wow, now we got to go through a whole public hearing scenario. So I kind of backed off of the way I felt. So I, there is a certain amount of trust, I think, in this process to go in front of one or two people, but still, we're still looking at it for the intent of what the ordinance means. And in this case, I think we're trying to draw out enough there where we don't have that much discretion. We can say, it's an interior lot, it's in a heavy industrial. I mean, that's finite right there. There's only a certain amount, and you can't see it from a public right of way.
And I fully understand the reasoning, and I would personally, I would support it, given the, what you just said, I would support it, but it was a decision made by a body instead of just one individual.
Mr. Workman.
Yeah, so I guess I would say the time for the commission to give that authority to permit that is now or during the public hearing. So all we're asking for now is, should we have a public hearing on this, hear from the public, and then look at that revision of the code, and then it goes to the city council, they have to approve it. We just have to notify DLCD. So there's some steps to get through. We're just taking an initial pulse of the planning commission at this point. But my comment would be, as I said, now is kind of the time, or during this approval process, that you were saying, if somebody submits a building permit and it's in heavy industrial and it's not within sight of a public right of way, then we should allow them to not have to comply with all of these design standards. So you do have input, that's the time that you're doing it. At that point, it's an administrative issue, and there's not really a need to take up time within an entire commission to make a decision. It's pretty black and white on paper.
So the question I have is, why does it need to be a variance? Couldn't we just change the code and say that if it's not visible, it can meet, it doesn't have those material requirements if it meets these requirements, if it meets these criteria?
We could, and that was the first option. I actually started down that road as I started looking at the code itself and the language in the code. It gets complicated the more exceptions you start making to each of the criteria. And I do think it's important for property owners to know that there's a separate process go through that variance. It's not automatic. So
I guess my concern is the way it reads right now is the criteria is absolutely clear, and then somebody just gets to decide yes or no based on no criteria.
Based on these two criteria.
Well, but if it's based on those two criteria, then there's no judgment involved and it's not a variance.
It could also be that, for example, that so it has to be in a heavy industrial. They put up, they show us the location that they want to put it in. And we look at the height, we look at the site, we look at the site plan, we look at the height of the building or the structure they want to put up. And they say, oh, you can't see it from a public right of way. And I go, I could definitely see that. 22 feet in this location of the lot, I can see that from a public right of way. So what we could do is, but that's where they want to put it. We could say, well, put some screening up. You're gonna have to put some type of screening up or whatever. So there could be a caveat to that, prior to granting them that variance, we say.
Well, I guess it's not the argument you made, but I guess the argument there is that if we made it part of the code and somebody had this great big piece of property, the first thing they do is put up some screening and then they can build anything they want, right? For materials.
Which is what we're trying to avoid, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the public right of way, you'd have to have quite a bit of screening. I mean, depending on how tall of a building you're talking about.
Yeah.
But, again, I guess the question is, so two-part, conceptually, are you okay with, is the commission comfortable with interior of a property? So again, not out on the public right of way, right? So you're not fronting the right of way, but within the interior of a heavy industrial zone, is the commission comfortable with not enforcing the design standards that we just spent a lot of time developing? So that's kind of the first question. And the second question is, at what level do you want that authority level to take place? Do you want staff to make those decisions? Heavy industrial, yes. Is it one of these uses? Yes or no? And if so, is it viewable from the public right of way? And that's going to be primarily based on height or what else is on the site, right? If there's nothing else on the site and you got a quarter mile of flat grass and then you've got a building there, well, then I would say it doesn't meet that. Do those types of decisions need to come to the planning commission for the planning commission body to look at, make those decisions? Or do you entrust the city planner and the planning official are able to look at those three criteria and make the decision without having to spend time and energy at the staff, at the committee level or the commission level to do those types of decisions? And if you look through, what's missing, if you look through Class B variances and you look through Class C variances, in my mind, this is much more in line with the Class B variance and the types of variances there than it is the type C variances and the types that are there. And so you can't see that here. Again, I didn't want to overload with all the, too much information here, but to me, this fits as a Class B variance fairly simply, but it does mean that the planning commission agrees with that conceptually, that it's okay.
Can I point out that with either type of variance, there is still notification to area property owners of at least 250 feet. Is that correct?
250 feet.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, that's stated.
yeah, it still goes, and there is still a public comment period with a Class
Mhm.
B variance. So.
That'd be a significant difference from just changing the criteria in the code. Commissioner Hunsinger.
Okay. I like these, the way it's written. I do have maybe a potential addition, but I would agree with what Chris and Pat is saying in terms of the criteria. It's kind of a either, not kind of, it is either or. And for it to come here just for an either or, as in, does it meet it or it doesn't meet it, it doesn't seem to be necessary. Now, the one thing that, and in my mind, I think about it in the terms of, well, I guess I would rather it not be proliferated. Of course, it would only be in the heavy industrial. And maybe, I'm not seeing it, but maybe it wouldn't be any big deal even if it was proliferated clear across the heavy industrial, because you couldn't see it. So what difference does it make? But I was wondering if a fourth criteria could be for temporary use, as opposed to, essentially this would allow permanent use. Otherwise, like there, for instance, putting up a metal structure and a canvas over the top. If you're going to do that forever, why wouldn't you, or why shouldn't you put it up, up a structure?
That's
That would be
the
my
point that
thought.
I wanted to bring up also, is that,
What's
you know,
temporary?
it's asked for temporary use, but yeah, what is temporary? What's the
Well,
time period at which you say no, make it permanent?
and I think I argued it a little bit when we were going through this language, is if they want to put up a permanent structure that's corrugated metal and it just looks like a great big metal box and nobody can see it, I think they ought to be allowed to. So I think the issue about temporary or not, I wouldn't make it temporary. I think it's more, it says if they build it, it has to meet the development standards for buildings in an industrial zone, which means all kinds of
Other stuff.
fire safety and egress and all those sorts of issues.
Oh, yeah.
So it has to be a safe structure.
Okay.
Mr. Wood.
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit. Pat and I got hung up a little bit of this, because when they first brought this up, they said, oh, we want to put this temporary structure up. So we're thinking like a 30 days, maybe 100-day kind of thing. This is like a seasonal thing. And then we saw the plans for this thing. It's like nothing temporary about this, right? It's steel frame, it's bolted together, it's not welded together, it's bolted together, canvas over top. That thing will sit for 30 years, 50 years. I don't know what the guarantee or the warranty on these things are, but the reason that in this particular case, and we don't want to make this decision based on this one case,
Yeah.
but in this situation, he doesn't own the land, right? He's leasing, he's a tenant. And he may lease somewhere else one day and want to take this building with him as opposed to leaving a building behind or building a building on somebody else's property that he's not going to be able to take with him. So in this case, it's a matter of owning the land and not owning the land. There's also some cost savings that come with this because you buy the kit that's pre-manufactured, ready to go, engineers are done, as opposed to having to do all that yourself. So there's some cost savings, but there's an ownership of the land issue here as well. And yeah, this owner and what's temporary and what's not gets a little blurry. So I'd recommend not going down that road and really just pick, again, the focus is what do we want buildings to look like if they're in the interior of a heavy industrial lot? And if we're okay with not imposing the new standards that we have, then, you know, going through the variance, I think is a good way to go.
Yeah, I like the variance just from the public notice aspect.
Gary made a good point. Right, as far as those other development standards, I mean, that does ends up with a list of things that needs to happen for this structure. So,
Another note if I can, for letter B, so 8B, there's a lot of uses that are allowed in the heavy industrial. It's anything that can be in light industrial and these list of additional things with conditional approvals. We did pick through that and pick things that wouldn't have a lot of public engagement and a lot, you know, you may have your deliveries, but mostly these are gonna be like internal use type buildings or distribution, but they're not gonna be heavily accessed by the public, right? And so of all of the industrial, light industrial, heavy industrial uses, we're trying to exclude this down to things that aren't really public engagement buildings, right? This is really employees, laborers, maybe your distributors and truck drivers and stuff, but they're not facing a public street and they're not really accessed by the public.
yeah, that's a good point.
So considering that we don't have to solve this today, and it's the question before us is are we willing to make a motion that we create a public hearing for this code language? Is there anything more to discuss or ask, or should we just move to create a public hearing and discuss it further?
There is a proposed motion on the backside of
No.
I move that the planning commission directs staff to set a public hearing for September 19th to consider the recommended amendments to PMC sections 18.45.080 and 18.155.030.
Second.
Yes.
Seconded by Commissioner Hunsaker. Any further comments, deliberations, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes 4-1. Old business, comprehensive plan chapter on urbanization.
This was a lot of red.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, even
Yes.
looking at the old one, the original one, some of that wasn't in red, you know, it's now in red. I felt it was kind of hard to read. Even though it's red and struck through, I'm not sure why the first paragraph is in red and not black. If that was the original language.
Oh, yeah.
All the strike through is in red on this one as opposed to strike through was in black.
But I think originally the first paragraph, or at least the first half of the paragraph was original. I don't think I brought my original with me, but I don't know, that's it. We've talked before, we've been through this before. Just because I felt it was hard to read, it was kind of beside the point.
You're right, we have talked about it, the strike throughs just being left in black, but for easier reading.
So what is our goal for this evening regarding the urbanization chapter?
Would like to get a point to where we can schedule a public hearing And notify DLCD of that public hearing and invite the public to come provide comments and then get to an approval. And that approval recommendation goes to the city council. And city council will then hold a public hearing as well. And then vote to amend the comprehensive plan, chapter 9. Typically, chapter 9 of urbanization is going to have a little bit heavier weight when you're looking at buildable land inventories, whether it be the housing needs analysis or the economic needs analysis that show you've got a deficit of housing for the projection year, for the 20-year projection of your population increase, or your needed housing or needed commercial or industrial lands. We're not in that situation. We have an excess amount of commercial land, residential and commercial lands. I say commercial twice, commercial, industrial and residential. So, this chapter, I think it's good to look through. When we talked at the last meeting, we talked about adding a little bit more of an explanatory statement in the beginning. That first paragraph in red is all that was there before. And so I added quite a bit of language in to explain what this chapter does and supporting statewide planning goal number 14. And, went through city's responsibilities within the growth boundary, provided a context statement, and then kind of moved in, again, just manipulating our current narrative so that it reflected this planning period. So tried to provide more of a narrative before just going right into the policies and goals, which has been what we've been doing with the other chapters. So hopefully that was clear for everybody. And then when it came to the actual goals and policies, that was really more just a function of establishing 3 goals based on the existing policies that were already in place. And so the first goal was growth, the second goal was facilities and services, and the third goal was edge compatibility. So looking at that urban fringe or the edge. And then depending on which the policy was, I dropped it into each of them into one of those 3 goals. So goal 1 got 3 policies, the second goal on facility services, anything that was related to facility services, which used to be number 7, number 9, dropped in there. And then under the edge compatibility, it was really just number 4 and number 6 and number 11. Some of these like 5, 8, and 10, the commission indicated those were no longer necessary, and I agree. So those are all red because they were struck through to be removed. So some of the red is just changing the policy numbers to actually say policy number, and then 2.1 or 2.2. So some of it's just formatting it to match previous chapters that we've updated. What I didn't take a lot of time in doing, although I included it for you in the packet, is the urbanization chapter from City of Monroe. They provided maybe a lot more, they provided a lot more detail, a lot of kind of aspirational things in there as well. Some of it I thought was okay to add, but a lot of it seemed like it was, again, maybe more feel good than actual necessary to have that urbanization as a policy. So, but that said, if anybody saw anything in that specific one or in any of the 2 or 3 samples that were given to you last month, I'd be happy to consider adding additional policies. But again, the sentiment I kind of got from last month's meeting was, let's give this a quick update. Let's not spend a lot of time on it. It's not really gonna have a big impact on us going forward, at least for the next 10, 20 years, because we don't anticipate needing to push out our urban growth boundary any. So I kind of did a quick review, adjusted the formatting, put things into groups, and didn't put a lot more effort into it, but happy to get your feedback.
The very last policy, 3.2, that should be 3.3 because you already have a 3.2, but I'm fine with this. And I looked at the different other cities, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff there that, to me, the urbanization part it relates to other things. And so what it says is mostly about relate into those other things like the housing and whatnot. So I don't think it needs to be big and bold, so I'm fine with it like this to go forward for a hearing.
Commissioner
Policy 2.1, the approval of delayed annexations. Are we, for some reason, I thought we weren't doing delayed annexations much anymore. Are we?
We're not, we still can. We haven't done one in a while, but there are certain circumstances where it still would benefit a property owner to do a delayed annexation and benefit the city.
Oh, okay.
So they're still allowed, we just don't do them like we
We
do.
just don't do them, okay.
I just have a question, just something I don't quite understand. In policy 3.2, it talks about the zoning of urban residential 5-acre minimum lots. So redevelopment at urban densities may occur more efficiently in the future. Can somebody explain that logic to me? Why did they choose 5, rather than 2 or 3? What's
I can take a stab at it. So I give some examples, but I think the easiest would be at UR5, when you're putting a house on a lot that's UR5, you're still, even if you put that house right in the middle of a 5-acre lot, you've still got a lot of room for development on the outskirts. Obviously, you put the house on one side or in the corner. Now you've made it easier for yourself for future development or for future urbanization of that lot. On a 2-acre piece, that gets a little more difficult, right? You can put a house right in the middle of a 2-acre lot and put an out barn and your other outbuilding, and all of a sudden to redevelop that 2 acres into something smaller gets much more difficult. And so you end up with 20 2-acre lots as opposed to 4 5-acre lots that you can actually divide in. So it's a matter of keeping that urbanization on a big enough parcel that it can be cut into smaller parcels still in the future.
okay? That makes sense.
But it's the county who actually codifies that because it's outside
The
the
county designates it as UR5, so they wouldn't allow a partition in anything smaller than a 5-acre parcel. I mean, the extreme would be if the county allowed a bunch of half-acre parcels in the urban growth boundary. Those half-acre parcels would never, financially, it would never pay to split a half-acre parcel into multiple. Once you get a nice big house on a half-acre lot, it's going to stay a half-acre lot with a big house on it. Right? So,
Thank you.
Yeah. In reference to that, and I was going to ask, separately from this, but I noticed there isn't these agreement with the county anymore. As I recall, one of the issues, particularly regarding the UR5 thing, was you did save so that it could be developed, but I guess I looked at it, or in the past, we looked at it more strongly that the city would want those parcels, those 5-acre parcels developed in such a way that, it could be redeveloped to residential standards and otherwise requiring that the house or however that's developed, say for that one house, that probably they couldn't plunk it right in the middle of the property, because that's why they would want to do that, so you couldn't redevelop it. So I don't know what the agreement is with the county anymore, so I'm not real, it's not really part of this, but I guess that is a question I have.
So at the bottom of the first page, it still does reference the urban growth management agreement with Benton County. It was updated in February 2020. Provides the city review of county actions and county review of city actions pertaining to the urban fringe. So in the urban growth boundary, both jurisdictions are going to review in the application. The county has a more formal series partition application that you have to go through, where they want to see this partition is going to allow for a future and a future and a future, and they're going to scale that The city's code is a little less formal because typically we're not dealing with large enough parcels to get divvied up multiple times. But even within our own partition, and I'm just talking partitions because that's talking the size of the lots. Within our own partition application, we do require that you show where that future partition could take place. If example, in fact, we've got one of these we're looking at right now. If you've got a 20,000 square foot lot, it's oversized, right? The maximum lot size will say R1 low density residential. Your maximum lot size in R1 is 10,500 square feet. So say you've got a 20,000 square foot lot. Well, if that's your lot, that's your house, and you're in the R1, you're non-conforming, right? You're larger than what's allowed, but you were there first, and so that's, you get it to stay. If you came in and said, we want to partition and split that in two, we wouldn't allow you to do the house with the, or the lot with the house on it would be 12,000 square foot, and then the other would be 8,000 square foot, because you'd be doing a partition, but the lot with the house on it is larger than the 10,005, it's a 12,000, so it's still non-conforming, and you'd have to show that that lot could be split at some point in the future. But if you're 12,000 square foot and the minimum is 7, there's no way you can split 12,000 into two 7,000 square foot lots. So our own part, the city's partition application wouldn't allow for additional non-conforming lot sizes. If you're gonna split up that 20,000 square foot lot, you split in half, you've got to show that in the future, you're not gonna continue to have non-conforming lots. You'd be able to split that into 3 lots that would all be conforming. So there's checks in there in that review process, and this still allows for the city and the county to do that review process. So
That makes sense. I just didn't remember.
that's probably more specifics than you were looking for, but that was fresh in mind. We were still with that last week.
I'll throw another thing out there though, because researching a lot of UGB expansions lately, doing one in Adair, they bring property in very, very high, like UR 50 instead of 5 acres, because I think even with RR5 or rural residential 5, if that's what it is, you want to see them develop in a way that they can subdivide in the future and be smaller. But we don't have anything that says you have to build it this way, or we're making you construct or design your lot because of, for this future development. You own the lot, you can put your house anywhere you want. Sometimes it's predicated on where your septic system can go to. So that becomes an issue. So you may want to think about increasing this to something that, because 5 sounds good because you think, okay, well now, but if that southeastern corner came in and you had a whole bunch of 5-acre lots, people might just want to live on it because 5-acre lots are pretty killer nowadays. People want to have a large area to live on. They have no intention of ever, they may not mind coming into the city, but they may not subdivide. So I don't know, maybe it's something that we look at.
I won't play city attorney too much here, but I don't know that we could down zone existing UR5s to UR50s. I think that'd be a taking and we'd end up probably paying out for that. So there's probably a legal reason to not be able to go from a 5 to a.
Are they 5s? They're 5s now?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's allowed.
And there's really only a few of them. I mean, all you'd really do is creating more non-conforming and you'd be limiting people's ability to develop into those 5 sites. Yeah, I would go.
It's more of an argument if you're going to be annexed in.
Right.
But because then if you're annexed in, you could come in at 5-acre lots inside the city now and build on that lot. Whereas if you've got a UR50, you're going to, someone's going to buy that lot and look at the value of subdividing it, to monetize it a lot more. But smaller lot, RR2s or RR5s, people say, yeah, I want to live in the city and I got a 5-acre lot. You know, maybe a generation or two down the line, somebody will come and buy it and subdivide it, but I like my 5 acres. So.
Yeah, again, if we were looking at an expansion of the UGB, then I think you look at that closer. We're not gonna be expanding the
It's true.
UGB in the next 10, 20 years, so.
It's quite different, yeah. And one of the benefits of bringing in, well, expanding the UGB and then before you annex it in, keep it in our UR 50, you know, or whatever, larger thing, is there's provisions if you're not increasing the amount of activity on that lot, you don't have, there's a bunch of different reviews that you'd have to go through that you avoid. Traffic impact analysis, environmental review, all that kind of stuff. So I think maybe my mind, I'll just stop here. My mind is on UGB expansion rather than
Really not expanding. We're not
what is
expanding.
going on here. So anyways, all right. Wasted 10 minutes.
We understand though.
So is there any other comments or proposed issues with this? Do we need a motion to?
We should do a motion to at least set a public hearing, and again, we can use that same September date. I remember what it was, 19th.
19th is our next meeting.
So move. I guess nobody wants to.
I'll second it.
So the motion was to set September 19th as a date for a public hearing on the urbanization chapter of the comprehensive plan. All those in favor? Aye. It's unanimous.
Get that prepared, we'll make those corrections, notify DLCD, and be ready for the hearing. Thank you.
So staff update?
I feel like we've seen this stuff before. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
It's, the activity it's been down, I'll tell you that, other than these legislative issues that we've been going over the last few meetings. If I owe you a staff report for yours truly Salon?
No,
Or a decision
it says your truly salon has been approved.
has been approved, did I do it? Okay.
Did you do that?
We got a couple of, I think there's a couple of interesting variance requests. They're just unique that are coming your way. I mean, probably not really worth going into them, but
The one on Applegate.
the one on Applegate, oh, that you've seen that kind of got postponed. Yeah, that one has a sewer easement going through the middle of it, but it is going on, it's going in the opposite direction. They're adding more property. They're non-conforming. They're going further into being non-conforming, but their lot coverage is already up there, and I don't know, it's gonna come. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of, I think, discussion on that one. I think it's something very similar to what Joe is, Commissioner Sullivan is thinking about doing too. So this one in Applegate might be kind of a first run, coming up with some, some unique circumstances that may or may not, in your eyes, justify variance, but unique nonetheless. And then same with Mr. Sullivan's variance request. So those, I think, will be coming. I think we'll be having a public hearing for that in September too. Just got postponed one month.
The project on Main Street by Newton Creek was, have you heard anything about that? I mean, it was nothing, okay. I guess, and the other question, and of course, there was a news article about the project down at the mill site. What they suggested in the article was nothing was happening. Basically since we had the commission meeting, whenever it was back in February, March or whatever. So ever since then, nothing has happened, or is that correct? As far as him doing anything?
Yeah, so I just gave an update to the city council last month. So you go back through and check that council meeting, because I went through quite a bit of that. He's applying for some funding, some new loans. He's trying to finalize the loan with, it's through Business Oregon, but it's a environmental cleanup loan to pay for the mitigation. Yeah, but as far as land use approvals on lot line adjustments, we're still waiting for application payment to process those, get the survey done. He does have a new agreed to scope of work with DEQ. That came out last week, I believe. So that has been updated. That's been a 8-month work in progress. Kind of a meeting of the minds between DEQ and Mill Pond Crossing on what mitigation is going to take place. So that was a lot of work that got done. But on the ground, no, I think the only thing that's been done on the ground is we did require him to add some construction fencing along the ditch on Willow Creek, and also along 16th Street. And we required him to put some no trespassing signs up along the perimeter as well.
I guess I look at it like even those two things are progress. Not maybe to the extent we wanted.
Yeah, it's a lowercase p at the most. Yeah.
Okay.
I drove over that fencing.
What's that?
I drove over the fencing without realizing it.
You drove over it?
Yeah. Like I went right over, because I was trying to look to see the ditches, and then I turned around and was like, oh my God, there's, like, it was all saggy, like the fence was there, and it was so low that like I went right over the top of it and didn't even
Police department's looking
notice.
for the license plate. They couldn't get it, but I'll let them know.
I was like, how did I get
I was gonna
it?
say,
On
were
this
you
side of this
trespassing?
fence? I was like, oh, I just drove over it. I didn't even see it.
So
I
you
drove
need
back
to get
over
it
it. Well, you gotta go.
Right.
Before we
But I was
digress
embarrassed
too
the
much,
second time.
I would have a question. I would just like a
So it's not keeping
clarification.
people out. That's all, that's my point.
I would like a clarification from last month, from Chris, how we were discussing the LID pretty much. And you had said that we'll be handling things much differently going forward because of the results of North 11th Street. And we will be much less friendly towards small infill development and less generous with an understanding of what that bond is going to look like. Now, I know that we're kind of leaning towards small infill development. So I was wondering, does that mean, are we going to be changing some code to make it much less friendly towards small infill development? Are we going to be changing some code when you say we will handle infill development much differently? So I'm not sure who the we are or the city. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be some code changes that makes it less friendly for infill development.
I've not seen any or proposed any. I don't know if Pat's worked on anything.
Well,
It sort of just gives you I think we're talking specifically for local improvement district for road improvements. And I think the intent is that we retain the ability to work with somebody and do a non-remonstrance agreement or make them do the improvements they're required to do by current code, not changing anything. Current code says you have to put in road, you have to put in infrastructure. We just have an option to postpone that or delay that, but the city's got burned on that, so we're just gonna make them do it now on infill development. I think we still retain the option. So being less friendly, meaning we're gonna probably be more cautious and allowing somebody to delay those improvements that they should be doing.
okay, so you're saying,
It's not being less friendly, we're just trying to be more cautious, we gotta protect the city.
Well,
you know, instead
Chris
of-
said less friendly, so I'm just trying to
I just-
understand exactly what that means.
But let's put that aside. So not less friendly, just more cautious. City got burned, and I think we're moving forward. Yeah, we're gonna have probably infill development here and there. And, or review it on an individual basis, but I think the intent is to, you know, protect the city rather than the developer. Wouldn't you say? I mean, I think that's common, right? That's what we're here for. Check, we're here to protect the city, health, safety, welfare, not the individual. So.
But
that's
we get to pick and choose. That's what I'm trying to understand.
We've always been able to pick or choose,
Okay,
always been able to.
In the past, we've chosen to extend non-remonstrance agreements when it was in the city's best interest, like on North 11th Street, when there was a future project planned. It was in the city and the neighbor's best interest to issue non-remonstrance agreements instead of requiring infill development to do those street improvements at that time before they reached building permits. In that case, it made sense. In other situations, it may not make sense. If there's no future street improvement plan for a street, it's not in the city's best interest to give a non-remonstrance agreement that may never come to fruition.
so our small, do we have a distinction? Is there somewhere in the code a distinction between what's a large development and then what's a small infill development?
No, development is development.
Okay,
The code says that any development requires street improvements to be made.
okay.
That's why you'll see, yeah, like a triplex or a duplex in the middle of a block, and they're the only ones that have sidewalk,
Right,
because, you know, that was the requirement. That would be a requirement for the next person and the next person as well. But the existing people, unless you do a special assessment, they wouldn't have to do it. And that's what the whole intent of the LID is. Delayed improvements. And everybody, I think for the most part, everyone knows that you do a larger project, the price comes down. Everybody saves a little bit rather than having them do it on an individual basis. You buy stuff. You combine it with other projects, drives the price down. And everybody saves, including the city, so.
Those are really nice infill. This is my personal sharing, but my favorite infill in the city, over on Main, the one between 8th and 9th, maybe. There was a lot there, and they tucked, like, maybe it's between 7th and
Probably
8th,
about right.
Oh,
8th and 9th.
8th and 9th. With
And it's just like they've
apartments.
wedged in, like, I don't know, maybe 3, it's like a triplex-ish going sideways. Nice landscaping. It could use a little work on the Main Street side. It's not great there, but for the most part, it looks like a nice little building. It's like packed in there. It was a nothing lot. And to me, I was like, see, that's totally what we need to be doing. There's a small lot. We put it, it's not like jammed in looking, but it's a good use of space. They look like, you know, fairly nice apartments. They're not as cruddy as a lot of them, and
I can't think of where you're talking about,
it's
It
right
is-
over here. You'll see it when you sort of,
Oh, okay.
you've gone past it a lot.
probably.
By that little, what's that little store? Right next to it.
Jonas?
No, not
On the other side of the
store.
street.
They make something there.
Pottery,
It's
the little
pottery.
ceramic place.
Oh.
Right next
The
to it.
reason you don't see it is because
Like-
because it doesn't face the street.
Yeah.
Like the entrances are going north south. So it's a very sort of low profile thing, which is again why it's a good use of space, like the lot size, like that, the apartments or condos or whatever they are.
And the previous conversation doesn't relate to a development like that because it already had all the street improvements.
Exactly,
And
that-
sidewalks.
That was there. It was just an
But it's
empty,
a nice
it was an
looking-
undeveloped lot, but I was happy with
I guess
with how it was developed. I was like, yeah, that's good use of space.
in reference to that, I was gonna ask you, Pat, I mean, you mentioned that's why you see a sidewalk and there's nothing on either side. But do you still hold a remonstrance on the water and sewer lines in the street? On that infill? They've signed that also, right? Or not?
The what, it typically wouldn't.
If, on a street that's not improved, an unimproved street.
But if the water and sewer lines are already there, then there's no need for a remonstrance.
Well, but that you would, okay.
We'd
so
require-
you would for
You'd require them probably, we're talking like,
the street anyway. It
yeah,
would
curb and
depend.
gutter, maybe some, taking, if it's a lot of these streets have the open ditch on either side, it's enclosing that and putting sidewalk over it.
Another common one is a sidewalk that's not ADA compliant.
Okay, so I'm, I may have stated that wrong. On 11th Street, there is the water and sewer going up and down 11. So the only thing you need there is the street and the storm sewers.
So,
And
Okay.
streetlights.
So we still have remonstrance agreements on those things, is what I'm trying to get at. Or, I mean, I guess I'm asking the question.
So a new development on that street, traditionally, yes, we would either require them to do it at the time, or if they aren't required at the time, we would require them to sign a non-constraint to pay to do that in the future.
But what exists there right now, we still hold non-remonstrance agreements on the developments, one of which was the main problem. We still hold them,
I'm not
right?
walking into that hole. The
Well-
recent development on North 11th Street, the triplexes all have non-remonstrant agreements in place, yes, to participate in the local.
I mean,
permit
one of them says he doesn't, but he does, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, the triplexes on the east side of the street all have non-remonstrant agreements in place, yes.
No,
Bernadine.
no, wait, this is part of it. Can we get an update on the landscaping?
On
On Pippa
Pippa,
Lane, yes.
yeah, there's only 2 houses in there that are completed and people are living in. They're still building on the left side, the duplexes on there. So of all of the development on there, the first house has a street tree. There's only 2 that don't. One of them, it's like a small, the garage is kind of offset and they have a small yard. And so both of those, they don't have the trees in there, but there's not really like a street tree landscape area there. So it's a little funky. But I guess I was under the impression that there was like a dozen homes in there that didn't have any street trees. And when I drove up there, I only saw 2 houses that didn't have the trees in them. And they look like fairly new landscaping. So
Right, the trees aren't big enough, the 2 that are there. There's also the house on the corner, right?
they,
Of
at the time,
11.
we only required like 1.5 inch tree. So
I thought it was 2. We moved it to 2.5.
at the time that they were installed, it was 1.5 inches.
But those ones just went in. The little teeny ones just went in.
Let's talk about it offline. So I think they were in before. It's when they were approved. It's not when they're installed.
When the project was.
Those homes were started a little over 1.5 years ago.
All right.
Then
But-
the duplexes being
More
built now
research.
will be required to have street trees in, and it will be to the new standard.
Okay. Yeah, I need to. Okay,
Look into it, and
I-
give us an update next month.
I think that's an interesting case study, and it would be worthwhile looking at that area a little more carefully and why things are the way they are. Because I went by there too, and it seems surprising how things were laid out and why our code doesn't require things to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So, I agree.
We've run into similar issue in other subdivisions as well, and Pat and I are scratching our head about it a little bit as well. That's part of the issue is the timing on when you issue the permit and when things are built, and when things are planted, and when things are approved. So it's a little funky. It's easy to require streets and sidewalks to be installed prior to issuing building permits. The street tree prior to occupancy gets problematic for whatever reason.
But it seems like somehow there's a design element there too that maybe just missing. We could just make Commissioner Bernardini be required approval for all new developments.
Why
Make
does
sure it's got
everything just
trees.
have to go through me. I know, that would be so much easier.
Yeah.
give me that gavel.
No, I'm gonna use it here
Approved.
unless somebody has something really pertinent to say. Meeting
Good night.
adjourned.
Okay.
We'll get you on the chair next to that. She can come in every day and approve
Yeah.
all the administrative approvals.
Where are the trees? Where are the trees?
I actually
And
had
it
to
didn't
get with my
follow-
judge.
Yeah, it didn't follow.
So I was like, how good is this guy?